Welcome to Commsverse. This session is called Explaining a Team's First Approach to Collaboration, and today will be presented to you by Zoe Wilson.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today at Commsverse. I hope you've all been having a fantastic conference the last couple of days, checking out some of the other really great sessions that we have. Now, before we get into explaining a team's first approach to collaboration and what that means, I just wanted to take a moment to say a huge thank you to all of the event sponsors. Without all of these, events like Commsverse wouldn't be able to happen. So please make sure that you go into each of the channels, you go to the booths, you virtually check out the sponsors who have made it possible for this event to take place today. So I'm Zoe Wilson. I am the Head of Enterprise Collaboration and Productivity here at Agilysys Limited, which is a systems integrator partner in the United Kingdom. We work typically with public sector, and in my role, I'm a technology evangelist who really helps drive adoption and usage of things like SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive. I've worked with SharePoint myself for about 15 years, and then more recently with Microsoft 365 for the last few years. And I have to say, Microsoft Teams is one thing that really does get me excited. On the screen at the moment, you can see my contact details. Follow me on Twitter at SharePoint_Zoe. You can find me on LinkedIn, and if you've got any questions that are not answered in this or in the breakout, please feel free to drop me an email. I'm more than happy to help. So first of all, I'm starting with a question. What is driving your digital transformation? I'm sure many of you have seen this already, but I think it is really fair to say that over the last 4 months, COVID-19 has been responsible for an absolutely ridiculous amount of digital transformation globally. Microsoft Teams, we've seen the user numbers rise to 75 million at the end of April. I believe that they're likely to be significantly higher now. And from an adoption perspective, COVID has been quite interesting because all of a sudden we have to take the kind of awareness out of digital transformation. We don't have to explain to people what's in it for them anymore. They already get this, and what I'm seeing for the first time is a real desire and willingness to embrace change. Now, the other thing that I've seen across a lot of our customers and the organisations that I work with is, in response to COVID-19, people have rolled out technology faster than they ever have before. They've rolled out Teams, they've enabled Teams for things like chats, meetings and calling, and people have jumped in feet first, and they've been really kind of willing and excited to use this new technology. But they recognise, and there is so much more that people can be doing within Teams, and what we'll do today is just explore a little bit of that. So first of all, I just wanted to explain what I actually mean by Teams First, and I'm going to start by explaining what Teams First isn't. So when people talk about Teams First, what I want people to do is to think, when they're doing something that they've always done, think about whether there's a way to do this better in Teams. But Teams First absolutely in no way equals Teams everything. What I'm not saying that Teams is the platform that you should be using for everything, but it is something that you can think of first to make your life easier and to work and collaborate more effectively together. So don't try to shoehorn everything into Teams. Teams can help with lots of use cases. It can help you collaborate and work together more effectively and efficiently and in more real time. But you shouldn't try to do absolutely everything with Teams. Microsoft 365 is a really feature-rich platform. It's got many mature products in there that are very capable of doing the job that they were designed to do. And the trick is to use the right tools, integrated with Teams where necessary, to really supercharge your work. And what we're trying to do is to look for use cases where Teams can help improve the flow of work. So, how can it help speed up the time to decision making? How can it help you get a quicker response from someone that you're working with? How can it help a group of people work on a document and collaborate together, rather than trying to, shoehorn things in there that shouldn't really fit? Another common question that common questions that I see when I'm talking to customers is about what to use when. So what to use when, which is the right tool, where should I save it? That's a really common one. With the introduction of Microsoft 365, there are now so many places to work, and quite often organisations still have legacy platforms as well. So that does create a lot of confusion. How do I use it? From an adoption standpoint, this is another really key one that you have to address as well. Where do I start? How do I find it? Who can see my content? And where do I go for help? Now, all of these are they are really common questions, and if you're in a situation, where you've maybe got teams out in a minimum viable form for communication, and you want to start allowing people to use it to collaborate more effectively, these are some of the questions that you need to think about answering for your organisation. People aren't afraid of change, they're afraid of the things that they don't know. So the more that you can help people feel comfortable with, with using the tools properly and with having a go, and the easier you can make it for them, the more successful that team's first approach is going to be. And what we recommend is, define a strategy for collaboration and communicate this to your organisation and educate them as well on what the right thing is to do. And identify key use cases to start with. Now, these key use cases may not be the only way to do something, and there may be loads of different ways that the same result can be achieved with the platform, but the idea is that by providing people with a use case and saying, this is how we want you to do this thing, and we'll go through what some of these things are shortly, you're starting to get them familiar with and comfortable with using the platform. And as they become more experienced and more advanced, they'll be able to start trying other ways to do things and identifying other use cases as well. So from a change adoption standpoint, even if you've got people using Teams in a minimum sense at, kind of the grassroots level, if you really want people to adopt fully and, to be able to engage with the products correctly, it's important to understand who your stakeholders are, understand, how they work, how to engage with them, how to get buy-in. And one of the real key success factors is to have visible and active support from the senior leadership team. Now, what do I mean by visible and active? I mean, not just saying we want you to use Teams, but actually championing the way, using Teams for things like organisation-wide town halls, having organisation-wide teams if you've got an organisation that's less than 5,000 users, using Teams, for collaboration and communication rather than email. So what you want is for your senior leadership team to lead from the top, and to do this, you need to empower them, because they won't automatically know how to do this by osmosis. I had a conversation with one of my senior leaders about this, and he said to me, I hate it when you say, the senior leaders need to lead from the top. You have to actually tell us what we need to do, and if we feel comfortable doing it and we've got the knowledge, we will absolutely do that. So definitely get that support from senior leadership. Communication is absolutely key. So having a communication plan, starting to raise awareness of the things that you're going to turn on or the things that you're going to launch, and starting to explain how this is going to benefit people, start to share what some of those use cases are, and look for people who are really keen and engaged as well, who can get involved in like a champions or super users network. And then when you start to launch some of the new capabilities that are in Teams, hold buzz days, hold launch events, run things like Teams live events, where you can actually get people, on board. You can show them how to do certain things within Teams, and just really, give people the information that they need to succeed. Make sure that you're giving the right support throughout that launch to the champions as well. So arming them with the right knowledge, giving them the support to be able to answer questions, create a community and a culture where they can, where they can support and help each other as well, and share learnings across the different parts of the organisation. And then to reinforce all of this as well, you want to be able to measure the impact that you're having. You want to be able to do things like review the adoption analytics, review the usage, look at things like, the trends that happen once you start turning Teams on for full collaboration. Do you start to see, email traffic is reducing as a result of that? And there are various reports that you get within Microsoft that will allow you to track this kind of thing. And I think another thing that's really important as well, coming back to the point I made earlier about, fear and people not being afraid of change. It's really important to, to create a culture where people are not afraid to experiment. Whilst you want to give people some really great use cases to start with, you also want them to try new things themselves. And this doesn't only apply to Teams. This applies to things like the Power Platform as well, and other parts of, Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365. You want to create a culture where people can look for new ways to solve problems, and they can try this, and then a way for them to feed that back to you as well. So the champions can help with this. You can use Teams itself to create a forum for the sharing of ideas and that culture, and longer term that will really drive that cultural change that we're looking for. So if I move forward, what I'm going to do now is just step through a few different use cases and look at some of the different options that we have for for each use case. So I thought I'd start off with a really easy one, which is communication. Now, traditionally, a lot of communication happens by email. On a personal level, I receive so many emails that I do struggle to keep up with them. And what I tend to see with emails, both when I receive them and when I write them, is that they tend to be very formal. They use really structured language. You start off with hello and a name, and you end with kind regards and a signature. And especially in COVID times, you've got this whole bit at the beginning asking how the family is and saying stay safe and well. So it takes a little bit of effort to craft an email. And another important thing to note as well is that when you send emails, typically you have a slower response time. So emails, they're very good for things like official or important communications, things like letters from HR that maybe even before that would have come through the post. I think those kinds of things are really great use cases for email, or perhaps formal emails to customers or partners or that kind of thing. Whereas the really great thing about communication in Teams is that it's a lot more informal, it's a lot more conversational, just like the kind of instant messengers that you'd use outside work. It's real time and more responsive. So if if you're working on a document and you just need a little bit of information for it, it's really easy just to ping someone in Teams, get that information quickly and carry on working. Whereas with an email, you might send that and you might not get anything back for a day or two or three. So Teams really helps with that kind of quick collaboration, quick checking in with someone. And you can target communications as well. So I could message you as an individual. I could have a group chat with a small group of people. And for each of those people that I'm talking to, I'm reducing the email traffic, meaning that they've got a clearer inbox and more time to focus on those official or important communications that maybe take a little bit more thought to deal with. So a useful tip: encourage people to use Teams chats and channels in the right way to reduce and replace unnecessary email traffic. What you don't want to happen, which I see sometimes, is you message someone in Teams and you send them an email. That's just giving someone double the amount of work. I think it's about understanding what the right tool is for the right job. And whether what you're saying is kind of serious or formal or official, in which case you probably want to send an email which is more structured, or whether it's more conversational and you need something that's a little bit more real-time and responsive, in which case that can go into Teams. And it's just worth adding a couple more things around communication as well. So within Teams, you can, within the Teams part of Teams, you can link into things like news pages in SharePoint sites through adding to a tab. And you can also use announcements in channels as well as another way of communicating with, with a group or with the organisation. So again, those are things that maybe would traditionally have been sent out on emails, and by funneling them through SharePoint and for the news, or through Teams for everything else, again, we're reducing that email traffic and just making the communication a little bit more on point. So moving forward, this is a use case where Teams actually just comes into its own, and that is project collaboration or project teams. So within my organisation, we use Teams really heavily for project teamwork, to the extent actually where we've created a custom team template that has channels for each of the project phases. We have code that brings in templates for each of the project phases as well, so that we are we're making all of our projects really standard and repeatable, and really clear where people need to do which bit of work in there. Projects teams, they can typically be cross-functional, so you might be working with people across many different parts of the organisation, and it's just so powerful because it allows you to be able to collaborate and work together in real time in channels, with the work groups really logically. It reduces project onboarding time. So, if you imagine you have a member of staff who leaves the organisation, you can bring a new person in and drop them into that team, and suddenly they've got all of the history, they've got all of the files that have been created, they can see all of the comments, and it's just incredibly powerful. And another thing as well that you can use is Planner. So a project manager can use Planner to assign tasks to project members, which is really powerful. What you can see in this screenshot here is actually what one of our templated teams looks like. So when we request a new project team, we actually create each of these channels in the background and drop the right templates in there, which is brilliant. What I would say as well, from a project collaboration perspective, from any collaboration perspective, don't be afraid of channels. Absolutely recommend that you create more channels and less teams, with the channels being used to group that content logically. When Teams was first released, I did have quite a lot of noise coming from colleagues and customers alike, where they said, look, I'm in like 10 teams with the same people. Why have I got so many teams? What can I do about it? And I think if you're in the same team with 10 people, then actually you should have one team with 10 channels, and that both tidies up the teams that you've got and makes it easier to find stuff as well. So don't be afraid of channels. You can show and hide the ones that are relevant or not relevant to you. But for me, it just absolutely makes sense to organise things like that. And where I see project collaboration being really successful, so projects in the traditional sense, absolutely, but they're also incredibly useful for things like bids and tenders, for campaigns, for strategy planning. There are tons of really great use cases, and to me, this is one of Teams' absolute strongest points. So I'm going to talk about organisation-wide communication now, which is a slightly different use case to the communication one that we've already touched earlier, in that we're typically thinking about how do maybe senior leaders or a comms team communicate or broadcast information across the whole organisation. And within the company that I work for, we have less than 5,000 users, so we use Teams for a lot of our org-wide communication. But unfortunately, if you're a larger organisation, there is a limit around how many people you can have in an org-wide team. Yammer is absolutely brilliant for for community and for communication. I think sometimes, depending on the size of organisations, Yammer and Teams can both struggle to have a place. And this isn't because I don't like Yammer. I think it's absolutely powerful when used correctly. The advantage that Teams has over Yammer is that Teams is where the work gets done. So people are already in Teams. What we see more and more these days is that when people log in on a morning, they open Outlook and they open Teams as well, and those two apps are where they spend the bulk of their time throughout the course of the day. So Yammer is brilliant for providing open and inclusive community spaces. You can have groups arranged by common interests and things like that. And one of the things that has always been a real strength for me is that it makes it easy to find experts and to be able to tap into some of the knowledge that you've got across the organisation. And I often see Yammer used really well for leadership communications as well. But then with Teams, like I said, it's this is a place where people are already working. It's the hub for teamwork where the work gets done. So from a communication perspective, if your organisation is the right size, this is an absolutely brilliant place to start. And there's nothing to say that you can't use these two together. But I think for Yammer, you need to have like a really clear ownership from kind of comms or marketing or something like that to really drive what it's being used for and lead by example. Whereas Teams is easier for people who maybe are not already using Yammer to to be able to get people on board. And I think from a kind of tip perspective, understanding where Yammer and Teams fit into your corporate landscape is really important. For smaller organisations, org-wide Teams can be an absolutely brilliant tool. Yammer can be as well, but I think I see a lot of organisations in my day-to-day work who maybe struggle to get the buy-in for the two of them together. I think that both Yammer and Teams support, leadership communications. They both support community. They both have an element of interactiveness, which is really great from an org-wide perspective. But I think for these, it definitely comes down to, first of all, the size of your organisation, and then second, the preference around your own internal communication styles. External collaboration. So this is another incredibly powerful Teams collaboration feature. So if we think for a moment about traditional ways of collaborating externally, and what I mean by collaborating externally is when I need to work on something with someone from another organisation. So this could be, my team and a customer, it could be us and a partner, or it could be us and a partner and a customer. And ideally, we are working together on producing some documents, some information. And what would happen historically is that there's very much a passing the baton approach when it comes to work. So, maybe we'd have a meeting and then I'd go away and start pulling together a document, and then I'd email that to someone else, and then that would come back and that would be emailed to someone else. And there's very much this reliance on this email exchange of data. It can be very slow, it can be very time consuming. There's a huge risk of ending up with duplicate versions of content, or with someone having to, manually pull together and consolidate several versions of the truth. And I'm sure you can tell from listening to me that is quite a painful process at times. So what Microsoft Teams Guest Access allows you to do is actually to be able to invite those third parties into a team that you control, where you get all of the really great collaboration benefits that you get with your internal colleagues as well. So things like being able to co-author documents together, having the full version control, having auditability so you can see what changes people are making. And for me, one of the real great benefits for this is around kind of ownership of content and data. And what I mean by that is, if I produce a document and I email it to you, I've lost control of that content. It now is with you and I have no control over what you do with that at that point. But if I put that into Teams and then we stop working on this project, I can stop your access to that team. And at that point, you can't get into that document anymore. And depending on the controls that I had in place for it, you know, I could potentially restrict what you could have done with it while you had access together as well. So, you know, there is very much a kind of data sovereignty aspect as well, you know, keep the content in a space that you control and where you can turn on or off that access. Now, a really important tip for Teams guest access is make sure that you implement the right security to protect confidential data in Teams. Now, what I mean by this is that the way the guest access controls work in a tenant is that it's either an all or nothing switch. So if you allow guest access and you don't do anything else, then anybody can add a guest into any team. If you say no guest access, then nobody can add any guests into any teams. What you want to do is to find a balance so that you allow guest access, but you have, you know, either controls that restrict which groups are allowed to have team guests added to the team, or, you know, content level protection. You need to find that right security to protect the things that are important to you, rather than just opening everything up to everyone. So this, I believe, is the last use case that I've got for you, which is live events. This is actually a live event that we're using today to present this session to you. And I'm a huge fan. I've personally spent quite a lot of time in live events over the last 4 months since we went into lockdown. And what I wanted to cover off today were just a few real simple use cases that I've personally helped with. So first of all, org-wide town halls. Teams live events are brilliant for communicating with everybody in your organisation. And I worked with the NHS Business Services Authority, whose CEO and senior leadership team, they wanted to run like a Q&A forum with their organisation to give employees the opportunity to ask questions about the COVID crisis. And I helped them run the first one, and it was really humbling and authentic seeing them, you know, in their own homes and answering these questions in a really open and transparent way. And it was incredibly well received, both by the employees within the organisation, but also the CEO and the SLT as well. You know, they found it to be a really rewarding way of communicating with their organisation. And it's something that they've actually continued on a weekly basis for the duration of the crisis. So this can be used for things like announcements, news, Q&A, updates, product launches. You know, the list is endless. And then a UK specific one. So there was some legislation changed in response to COVID, which allowed council meetings to be held virtually for the first time since the 70s. And we've supported various organisations in moving some of their council meetings to being live events, which means that they can actually stream those to the public, who can witness democracy in action, as it were. The states of Guernsey also actually moved their entire parliaments to being run through virtual live events, and they did that in about a week, which was incredibly impressive. And the states of Guernsey are a little bit ahead of where the rest of the UK is in terms of lockdown. They're actually out of lockdown now, and they're running parliament in the normal way. But they found Teams live events so powerful that they're actually using this as a tool to continue to stream to the public and to be able to get the recordings. And my understanding is that they're planning to continue to do that as well. And then the last one is public announcements. So that's essentially, you know, what we're doing now. We're using Teams live events to communicate to the public. I've used this for my organisation to run several webinars. And it's just a really simple and easy way to be able to broadcast to people in a way that is professional, and you don't have people kind of coming off mute and disrupting things while you're in full flow, which is brilliant. So live events is a really good way for facilitating one-to-many broadcasts and having that really slick communication when you've got something important to say. So this is actually my last use case, which is, this isn't something that I've worked on, but I wanted to share this because this is such a powerful story. And I had a really good interview with a chap called Adam Igra, who is the transformation director at this hospital trust. And he shared with me the story of what they achieved in around 10 days through the power of Microsoft Teams. So when COVID hit, they'd just rolled out Teams for communication at that point. So just Teams, just chats, callings, meetings. And what happened when COVID hit? They're a respiratory specialist hospital, and they were told they needed to quadruple the size of their intensive care unit. So what Adam did, he wanted to see how they could use Teams to improve critical care. And at the side of every patient bed, there's a little trolley with a terminal on it, and they purchased some basic Teams licenses, and they had a kind of a generic account set up at the side of every patient on one of these terminals. And then they crowdsourced on FreeCycle and Facebook Marketplace loads of webcams and speakers, because at that point you just couldn't get them. Everyone had gone to work from home, and all of these things were out of stock. And they set these up on each of the terminals, and then outside of the intensive care unit, or the COVID red zone, they had an on-call station where they had like an on-call clinician who was sat waiting for the calls from the nurses. So what this meant was that if there was a nurse in the red zone with the patients, and there was something that she needed a consultant to help her with, rather than the consultant having to wash up and get the PPE on and get to her in maybe half an hour or 40 minutes, she was able to call them through Microsoft Teams. She could point the webcam at the ventilator and all of the equipment that the patient was connected to, so that the consultant could see the readings. And he was able to provide immediate clinical assistance to her from the safety of the green zone. So what this meant was that the on-call consultants were able to be shared amongst more patients. It required less PPE, the staff felt safer. And that wasn't the only thing that they did. They also used Microsoft Teams to facilitate end-of-life calls for families as well. So the families obviously couldn't get into the hospital to say goodbye to their loved ones who were at end of life. So Royal Brompton used Microsoft Teams to actually allow people to be able to have those really important calls with family members. And they used it as well for conferences between the clinical teams, so the various doctors and nurses who were involved in caring for the patient, and the family members as well. And the reason I wanted to share this was just to say that don't be afraid to innovate and try new things. This has been quite a unique situation, but this is just a really great example of how things like Microsoft Teams can help completely change how people work. And how, this is just such a great story. So I'm not going to go through this in detail. I just wanted to mention this very briefly, and the slides for this will be shared with you afterwards as well, so you will get all of this detail. But I've mentioned governance a couple of times, and I just wanted to give you an idea of, when I talk about Teams governance, what is it that I'm thinking of? And these are the kinds of things that you need to think about, and you need to understand what it is you want to do in each of these areas, and then have the configuration and the controls in place for that. And Teams governance, if you've got the governance right, it provides the guardrails which allow your users to work and collaborate safely. You want to make it easy for them to do the right thing and hard for them to do the wrong thing. And the way that you do that is through getting things like, life cycle management and policies and all of that really great stuff in place. Again, it's something I only want to touch on briefly, but as part of simplifying the user experience, moving content into the place where work gets done, so in this case Microsoft Teams, can be really valuable. And moving content from file shares or from legacy SharePoint systems or Documentum or other document management systems, it can simplify the flow of work. It can make it easy for people to find the content they're working with, but it's important to note that it will not work like a traditional file share. There will be an element of metadata mapping and re-architecting the data that needs to happen, and just doing kind of a lift and shift of a folder structure into a Teams library. It's not going to be successful because you do need to do things like map data into channels. And a really, really good thing that we've learned is that user adoption for this kind of project where you move content into Teams must focus on good search habits. What we found was that where we've migrated file share content into Teams, people were so used to their old way of working, which was to scroll through folders, that when you're trying to scroll through a list of folders in the Teams client, every time you get to the bottom, the whole thing has to load again, and it takes a few seconds to buffer and show you that next bit of content. So teaching people how to search instead is really key if you want them to get that good user experience. So this is my last slide. I just wanted to summarise with some of the key tips and tricks for success and some of the things that we've learned over the last few years of working with Microsoft Teams and helping people use it successfully to collaborate. So again, I've just mentioned this, but it's really important. Teach people how to use search effectively. Support adoption with on-demand video training. You can give people all of the training in the world, but if they're not using something all of the time, they will forget it. There are some really great things out there like Combined Knowledge, who've got the bite-size e-learning tools, which is absolutely fantastic and incredibly cost-effective. Giving your staff something like that will really help them be successful long term. Establish a champions network. Find the people who are really keen to volunteer. Help them be good. Help them champion what good looks like. Provide some clear use cases. Give people scenarios around when they should email versus when they should use Teams. How they should use Teams for collaborating with. On a project, for collaborating with external people, and explain to them what good looks like. Create templates for common Teams users. So what we don't recommend is that you go in and create loads of templates on day one because they might not be right. But as you start to see people with real clear repeatable use cases for collaboration, look to create templates because then that makes it easier for people to continue to work in a really good way. Governance guardrails. So again, make it easy for people to do the right thing, make it hard for them to do the wrong thing. As IT professionals, it's our responsibility to do the thinking like this for users, and then they can just go along and work knowing that they're not going to do the wrong thing. If you've already rolled out Teams, there's no time like the present to go back and retrofit some of these governance controls. There's typically nothing that is done so wrong that you can't unpick it or you can't retrofit it. But you don't want to let the usage of Teams go much further before you go back and retrofit this. Lead by example, and this isn't just lead from the top, from kind of SLT and C-level, but anybody who's involved in working with Teams, lead by example, help people understand what good looks like, show them good practices, message people if they do maybe do something that's not quite right, and don't make them feel bad for it, but show them how to do the right thing and lead by example. And don't be afraid to reach out to experts for help. There's tons of people out there, MVPs, partners, specialists who who work with this day in, day out. If there's anything that I've talked about that scares you and you don't know where to start, just reach out and use the resources that are available for you. So that's everything from me. I hope you found that useful. I hope you've learned a little bit around what Teams First is and some different collaboration scenarios. I've got my contact details on the screen, and I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you again to the event sponsors. Perfect. Have we got any questions, Mr. Producer?
Nope. Thanks a lot, Zoe. We don't have any questions, but if you want to talk to Zoe after the session, I've posted the breakout session URL in the Q&A. So check that out and join that meeting. And thank you for watching.
Perfect. So hopefully see you over there.